Rode it. I wake with a jolt, the RV lurching violently. The road must have collapsed beneath me. What I thought was just a pothole was more like a sinkhole. I chuckle weakly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Somewhere in Georgia, I detoured off my usual Utah route to visit my sister. Been on the road so long I can't even remember anymore. Days blur into one long, exhausting stretch when you live like I do. My name's Jasper, by the way. I stretch and squint through the window. Dawn is creeping over the horizon, the pale light barely piercing the dense, overgrown trees around me. I must have veered off the highway sometime last night. Can't even see the road now. Probably wouldn't have noticed in the dark. I grab my old map from the glove compartment, squinting at it. No towns, no campsites. Looks like it's time for some classic boondocking. Guess a road trip wouldn't be a road trip without a little unplanned adventure, right? I laugh, but it's hollow. I'm alone out here, and that silence presses in on me like a weight. I step outside to stretch my legs, and the air is thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The trees tower over me, making the redwoods back in California look like saplings. Everything around me feels wrong. Strangely quiet. No birds, no wind. No sound, really. Just a stifling silence that crawls under my skin. After a hasty breakfast of protein bars and lukewarm water, I decide to scout around and find a way back to the highway. I can't stay out here forever. I strap on my boots and grab my walking stick, hacking through the overgrown path. The underbrush thins out after a couple 100 yards, and then a stench hits me. It's rancid, like rotting meat. My stomach churns. Maybe a dead deer. It happens out here sometimes. But as I push forward, I see it. A clearing. At first, I think it's just a mess, a campsite that some careless kids abandoned, ragged clothes, torn plastic. But as I get closer, a creeping sense of dread settles in my chest. No. This isn't just trash, fur, dark, matted clumps of fur scattered across the clearing, and bones, big ones, too many of them. Something primal gnaws at my insides, a cold dread washing over me. I start to back away, my mind racing for an explanation. I turn, searching for whatever did this, when a twig snaps behind me. My heart leaps into my throat, and I whirl around. It's just a squirrel, darting up a tree. But it's enough. My legs begin to move before I even think about it, pushing me through the forest, desperate to get away. I don't care where I'm going, just as long as it's away from that clearing. After what feels like hours, I stumble back to the RV, gasping for breath. I slam the door behind me, my heart pounding, my mind spiraling. What the hell was that? Coyotes? Wolves? But nothing I've ever heard, nothing I've ever seen could do that. I grab the binoculars and scan the tree line. My hands shake as I focus on the clearing. Nothing. I mutter to myself, trying to steady my nerves. Get a grip, Jasper. Probably just a poacher's leftovers, or some big city boy who's never seen anything worse than a raccoon digging through the trash. But that image of the bones won't leave my mind. The shape of them, long but not quite right. The rest of the day passes in a fog. I tell myself it was nothing. I try to convince myself it was just an animal. But as night falls, the woods feel alive. Every rustle, every crack of a branch, every shadow, my heart races, my breath shallow, every noise sending a jolt of terror through me. I check the locks on the RV for the 10th time. I don't feel safe. Not tonight. Then, around midnight, the noises start. Scratching. A low, guttural growl. Squeals that don't sound like anything I've ever heard. I huddle in the back of the RV, shotgun in hand, eyes wide and fixed on the door. I hear it now. The thumping, heavy against the metal, something circling outside, bumping, scraping. I peer through the window, but the darkness is absolute. The blinds are drawn. I grab my phone, hands trembling, and dial 911. Please pick up, I whisper, almost pleading. The line crackles, then a voice comes through. Hello? Hello. We need help. We're on Highway 76. Then the line goes dead. My heart drops into my stomach. Someone else is out here. Someone else is in danger. The thumping continues, relentless, shaking the whole RV. The footsteps start again, heavy, uneven, too big to be human. I hold my breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I slip to the floor, my eyes crawling along the gap under the bed, my pulse roaring in my ears. I see something. Feet, bare, clawed, and hairless. Too big, too wrong. A cold, primal nausea surges through me. This thing, whatever it is, isn't natural. I pull myself back, reaching for the shotgun. The footsteps move, heavy and deliberate, toward the back of the RV. I hear scrabbling on the roof. Something massive, something powerful is trying to claw its way inside. And then, Crash! The skylight shatters, glass rains down, and in that instant, I see it. It lunges. I freeze. This creature is huge. Its dark body, impossibly long, slams through the window, filling the tiny space with its mass. My mind goes numb as the world tilts, my body slamming into the floor beneath the weight of its monstrous form. For a moment, there is only pain, wet fur, a smell like rot. Then, with a surge of instinct, I lift the shotgun, my hands shaking. I fire once, twice. The blast echoes in the cramped RV, deafening. The creature screeches, an awful, blood-curdling sound, and falls still. For a long time, I can't move. I'm pinned under its weight, gasping for air, my body aching. The smell is overwhelming. Finally, I struggle out from under it, my vision spinning. I force myself to look at it, and it's worse than I imagined. Bigger than any bear. Its skin is stretched tight over strange, prominent bones, the color of dead ash. Its neck is long and serpentine, and its head too small yet too large. But the worst part, the part that makes my blood run cold, are its eyes, milky white and impossibly wide. I turn away, vomiting into the corner of the bed. It takes me a long time to look at it again, but when I do, the name springs to my mind. Bone Stripper. That's what it had done to those poor animals in the clearing. Stripped them clean to the bone. I need to leave, but staying is worse than death. I gather my things quickly, the shotgun pressed to my side. As I inch toward the driver's seat, my eyes catch something. My phone, discarded during the struggle. It flickers to life in my hand, and my heart leaps into my throat. Could I get a signal? I check the screen. One missed call. Unknown number. I press play on the voicemail. The dispatcher's voice is frantic, trembling with fear. "They're everywhere," she gasps. "We need backup. Oh God, they're inside." The message cuts off abruptly. I can't breathe. The weight of it presses down on me. How many of these creatures are out there? I don't stay to find out. I leave the RV and, in the morning light, the forest looks different. The trees seem thinner. The clearing doesn't look as menacing, but the bones, they're still there. I walk. For hours, I trudge down the path, shotgun grip tight. When I finally reach the highway, the sun is beating down, hot and suffocating. A car. I wave frantically. It screeches to a halt. A woman jumps out, wide-eyed, listening to my story, her expression blank at first. Then she nods grimly. "My husband, he went missing last week. Hunting trip. We never found his body." Her face hardens. "We need to tell someone. The police, the rangers, anyone who will listen." We do. We tell our story to anyone who will listen. Truck drivers, hikers, tourists. Some think we're crazy, but some, they understand the danger. It's a start. Maybe, just maybe, together, we can make sure no one else falls prey to the creatures that hunt in the forgotten corners of the wild. My name is Nolan Prescott, and back in 2017, I decided to take my RV into the remote wilderness of the Yukon Territory in Canada. I'd always sought solace in the untamed beauty of the wild, a reprieve from the endless grind of city life as an accountant. The open road and towering pines stretched endlessly, their presence both comforting and humbling. I set off early, the sun casting a golden glow over the rugged terrain. My plan was simple: drive until I found a spot that spoke to me, set up camp, and lose myself in the pages of a good book. By midday, solitude wrapped around me like a thick blanket. I stumbled upon a pristine clearing beside a lake, so still it mirrored the sky, a scene plucked straight from a postcard. I parked the RV, its engine's rumble fading into the quiet of the wilderness, and set off to explore. The forest was alive with the hum of nature. Birds chirped sporadically, and the soft rustling of underbrush hinted at unseen animals darting about. I chuckled to myself, thinking this was the kind of place where people claimed to find themselves. But as the hours ticked by, the vibrant symphony of nature faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. No birds, no wind rustling through leaves, just the crunch of my boots on the forest floor. I brushed it off, attributing it to the sheer remoteness of my surroundings. That was when I saw it, a weathered, crumbling cabin half hidden by overgrowth, its wood dark with age and decay. Something about the cabin called to me, curiosity maybe, or the thrill of stumbling across a relic of the past. The air grew colder as I approached, and with a reluctant push, I swung the creaking door open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with a faint metallic tang. The sparse interior was eerie. A table, a single chair, and a rusted stove. On the table lay a notebook, its pages yellowed and curling at the edges. I flipped through it, the entries chronicling hunting trips and survival struggles from decades ago. One name appeared repeatedly: Silas Kane. The last entry sent a chill racing down my spine. The voices are louder now. They won't let me leave. An unease settled in my gut as I left the cabin, shadows lengthening in the dying light. The forest seemed to shift, closing in around me. Every step back to the RV felt heavier, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot, and faintly, something else. The sense of being watched crept over me. I quickened my pace, but every so often, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made my breath hitch. When I finally reached the RV, I locked the doors, seeking safety in its cramped interior. The wind had picked up, and branches scraped against the metal exterior like skeletal fingers. I tried to focus on my book, but my mind kept drifting back to the journal and its ominous warning. Around midnight, a loud thud jolted me awake. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the RV. Probably a bear, I thought, though the tightness in my chest told me otherwise. Reaching for the drawer beside me, I cursed under my breath. I'd forgotten my camping knife. The footsteps grew louder. Then came the scratching at the door, deliberate and unnervingly human. Summoning my courage, I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Peering through the window, I saw him. A gaunt, wild-eyed man standing a few yards away, a bloodied axe hanging from his hand. His face was twisted in a grin that sent icy fear coursing through my veins. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice cracking. He tilted his head as if amused before stepping forward. The RV engine sputtered as I desperately tried to start it, the old vehicle refusing to cooperate. The man pounded on the door with terrifying strength, each strike denting the metal. Scrambling, I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit, my hands trembling as I aimed it at the door. The pounding stopped. I exhaled shakily, but then a loud crash shattered the rear window. His arm shot through, clawing for the lock. Acting on instinct, I fired the flare gun. The blazing light streaked past him, igniting the curtain. Flames spread rapidly, smoke filling the RV. Coughing, I kicked open the side door and ran into the night. Behind me, the RV burned like a beacon, illuminating the figure chasing me. His laughter echoed through the trees, cruel and unhinged. Branches tore at my face as I stumbled through the dark forest, adrenaline the only thing keeping me moving. I slid down a ravine, pain shooting through my ankle. Hiding behind a boulder, I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. "You can't hide forever," his voice called, mocking and sing-song. When he appeared above the ravine, I gripped a jagged tree branch, ready to fight. As he descended, I lunged, driving the makeshift weapon into his leg. He roared in pain, but it only seemed to fuel his rage. We grappled, his strength terrifyingly inhuman, but a well-aimed swing of the axe ended it. He crumpled, his final breath a chilling rasp. I limped until I found a dirt road. A passing vehicle stopped, the couple inside pulling me to safety. Days later, police confirmed the man's identity: Silas Kane, a hunter who had vanished years ago, succumbing to madness. The wilderness, once my sanctuary, became a place of nightmares. I left it behind, but even now, in the safety of the city, his laughter haunts my dreams. I wake with a jolt, the RV lurching violently. The sharp tilt sends my coffee mug clattering to the floor, and my stomach churns. The road beneath me must have given way. What I thought was just a pothole was more like a sinkhole. I laugh shakily, trying to rub the sleep from my eyes. Somewhere in Georgia, I detoured off my usual Utah route to visit my sister. Been on the road so long I can't even remember anymore. Days blur into one long stretch when you live like I do. My name's Jasper, by the way. I stretch and squint through the window. Dawn creeps over the horizon, the pale light barely piercing the dense, overgrown trees surrounding me. I must have veered off the highway last night. Can't even see the road now. Probably wouldn't have noticed in the dark. I grab my old map from the glove compartment, squinting at it. No towns, no campsites, nothing but a wide expanse of wilderness. Looks like it's time for some classic boondocking. I chuckle, but it comes out hollow. The silence presses in, heavy and oppressive. I step outside to stretch my legs, and the air feels wrong, too still, too thick. The trees loom overhead, ancient and suffocating, their shadows swallowing the light. Breakfast is a quick, tasteless affair. protein bars and lukewarm water. I decide to scout the area and find a way back to the highway. With boots strapped on and walking stick in hand, I push through the dense underbrush. The forest seems endless, the sunlight dimming as I go deeper. That's when the smell hits me. It's rancid, like meat left to rot in the sun for days. My stomach twists as I press forward, trying to convince myself it's just a dead deer or a bear carcass. But when I reach the clearing, the sight before me makes my blood run cold. Bones, strewn everywhere, their pale surfaces picked clean. Clumps of dark, matted fur dot the ground, and scraps of fabric hang from nearby branches. It's not just the sight, it's the arrangement. There's something intentional about it, something deliberate. My instincts scream at me to leave, but my legs feel frozen in place. Then I hear it, a twig snapping behind me. My heart leaps into my throat as I whirl around, my walking stick raised. Nothing, just shadows and the faint rustle of leaves. But I swear I can feel eyes on me, watching from the depths of the forest. I stumble backward, nearly tripping over the bones before breaking into a full sprint. My only thought is to get back to the RV. When I finally reach it, I slam the door and lock it, my chest heaving. My hands shake as I grab my binoculars, scanning the tree line from the safety of my makeshift fortress. Nothing moves, but the unease refuses to fade. The clearing, the bones, the unnatural silence, it all feels wrong. Night falls quickly, wrapping the forest in an impenetrable darkness. I sit in the RV with every light on, the shotgun resting across my lap. I keep telling myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know better. The first sound comes around midnight, a faint scratching at the door. My breath catches, and I freeze, straining to listen. Then it comes again, louder this time. The growl that follows sends a chill racing down my spine. It's low, guttural, and unlike anything I've ever heard. The RV shakes as something heavy slams against the side. My heart pounds as I clutch the shotgun tighter. Whatever's out there isn't just passing by, it's trying to get in. The growls grow louder, mingling with a strange, high-pitched squealing that makes my skin crawl. A loud crash shatters the skylight above me. Glass rains down as a massive shape lands inside, its body blocking the narrow space. My mind reels at the sight, a creature unlike anything I've ever seen. Its gaunt, elongated frame covered in patchy fur. Its milky eyes gleam in the dim light, and its claws dig into the floor as it lunges. I fire the shotgun, the deafening blast lighting up the RV. The creature recoils, letting out a piercing shriek. I fire again, and it collapses, its grotesque form sprawled across the floor. For a moment, everything is silent except for my ragged breathing. As I force myself to look at the thing, bile rises in my throat. Its body is wrong, twisted and stretched, its bones jutting out at odd angles. And its face, God, its face, too small, too elongated, and those eyes still staring blankly. I don't stay to examine it further. Grabbing my keys and a flashlight, I bolt from the RV. The forest is no less terrifying at night, but I'd rather take my chances out here than stay with that thing. My legs carry me blindly until I stumble onto a dirt road. Hours later, a car finally appears, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver listens to my story, her face pale. She tells me her husband went missing in these woods last week during a hunting trip. We call the authorities, but when they reach the RV, the creature is gone. Only the shattered glass and claw marks remain as proof of my ordeal. Even now, back in civilization, I can't escape the memory. The creature, the bones, the unshakable feeling of being watched. It haunts me. And I know, deep down, that the forest is still out there, hiding things we're not meant to understand. My name is Luther Padet, and what I'm about to share isn't some fabricated ghost story. It's real. It happened back in 1995 at Camp Hickory Hill, deep in the heart of Kentucky. The trees grew too thick, their shadows too dark, and the air clung to your skin, heavy with secrets. I was a skinny, awkward 16-year-old with oversized glasses and a backpack crammed with comic books. My mom thought a summer at camp would build character, a dose of fresh air and real-world experience. What I got instead was a nightmare that still haunts me. The first few days were typical camp fare: archery, campfires, and the relentless assault of mosquitoes. I stuck close to Elroy and Silas, two fellow misfits who shared my disdain for the outdoors. We bonded over failed fire-starting attempts and sneaking snacks from the mess hall. But on the fifth night, everything changed. That evening, our counselor Mitch gathered us around the fire and spun tales about the Kentucky Wild Man, a hermit-turned-killer who stalked the woods, hunting unwary campers. His voice dropped to a whisper as he described glowing eyes and claw-like hands. Most of the kids laughed nervously, but Mitch's eyes... There was something unsettling in his gaze, like he wasn't telling us the whole story. As we walked back to our cabin, Elroy tripped over something buried in the dirt, a rusted knife, its blade jagged and chipped. Mitch snatched it up, his face pale. "Go to bed. Now," he barked, his voice shaking. He muttered something about old traps and danger, but his fear set my nerves on edge. A few nights later, Silas and I decided to sneak out. We'd heard strange noises, branches snapping, whispers on the wind. Our curiosity outweighed our fear. Armed with a flashlight and an overinflated sense of bravery, we crept into the woods. The deeper we ventured, the quieter the forest became. The usual hum of insects and rustling leaves faded into an oppressive silence. Then we saw it, a cabin, hidden among the trees, its wooden frame warped with age. The door hung open, creaking in the faint breeze like a whispered warning. Inside, the air was damp and suffocating. Yellowed newspapers littered the floor, and deep gouges marred the walls. Silas picked up a crumpled headline from 1983, "Camper Missing in Hickory Hill." My stomach churned as the implications sank in, but before we could flee, we heard a low, guttural moan. The sound came from a back room. "Stay here," Silas whispered, but I followed him anyway. What we found froze us in place. A man, filthy, emaciated, chained to the wall. His eyes, wild and sunken, locked onto ours. "Help me," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Before we could act, heavy footsteps thudded outside. A figure stepped into the doorway, a hulking man with a scar running down his face, carrying a hunting knife. His gaze swept the room, and his lips twisted into a cruel smile when he saw the shackled man. "You're quiet tonight," he growled, driving his boot into the captive's ribs. "Don't worry, you'll have company soon." Silas and I didn't breathe. We pressed ourselves into the shadows, trembling as the man worked, muttering under his breath while checking the chains. His presence filled the cabin like a storm cloud, oppressive and violent. Finally, he left, the door slamming shut behind him. We didn't wait. We ran, crashing through the woods, our lungs burning and our hearts pounding. When we burst into camp, we found Mitch and poured out the story. At first, he didn't believe us, but something in our faces convinced him. He gathered 2 other counselors, and together we returned to the cabin. But when we got there, it was empty. The man, the chains, even the newspapers, they were gone. Only the gouges in the walls and disturbed earth hinted at what we'd seen. Mitch cursed under his breath, ordered us back to camp, and called the police. They searched the area but found nothing. The camp shut down early that year. We went home, but I couldn't escape the nightmare. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing that man's rasped plea for help. Months later, I saw a news report. Bodies discovered in shallow graves near Camp Hickory Hill. The case went cold. The killer was never caught. Years passed, but the memory stayed with me. Eventually, I learned the truth. The man we found wasn't the monster. He was a victim, a former camper, abducted years ago by a recluse who used the wild man legend to cover his crimes. Silas and I don't talk about that summer, but the fear lingers. The real monsters aren't the ones we tell stories about around a campfire. They're the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting in the shadows. It all began with a bad decision, as these things always do. I should have stuck to the main trails in the Gila National Forest, but the pull of Devil's Pass was too strong to resist. The name itself, Devil's Pass, was a warning, yet I ignored it. The prospect of capturing something unique for my nature photography portfolio clouded my judgment. At the ranger station, I met Sam and Kelly. Meeting them felt like fate, or maybe a warning. Sam was wiry and rugged, his grizzled beard and overconfidence barely concealing a certain recklessness. Kelly, his wife, was his opposite. Quiet, withdrawn, and visibly worn down by years of following Sam's ill-conceived adventures. "You're heading to Devil's Pass?" Sam asked, eyeing my map. "We're going there too, safer in numbers." I hesitated. I preferred solitude, but something in his insistence and Kelly's wary expression made me agree. The trail was more dangerous than I'd anticipated. Barely a mile in, Kelly's boots started to fall apart. These things are garbage, she muttered, holding up the peeling sole. Maybe we should head back, I suggested, but Sam scoffed. She's fine, he said sharply, grabbing duct tape from my pack to patch her boot. Kelly gave me a weak smile, but I could see her frustration simmering beneath the surface. We pressed on, the forest thickening around us. The trail markers began to vanish, replaced by an eerie, unnatural silence. An acrid smell lingered in the air, growing stronger the deeper we went. You sure this is the right way? I asked, the terrain no longer matching the map. Trust me, Sam said, waving me off. The ridge is just ahead. He was right. The ridge offered a breathtaking view, the jagged cliffs painted in hues of gold by the setting sun. I snapped a few photos while Sam set up camp near a cluster of strange, weathered rocks. It wasn't until dusk that we noticed the petroglyphs. These don't look like anything I've ever seen, Kelly murmured, running her fingers over a carving of a humanoid figure with antlers and unnaturally long limbs. Probably just some old art, Sam said dismissively, but the carvings felt alive, their empty eyes following us as we moved. That night, I woke to a sound I couldn't place, a soft whisper carried on the wind. Jenna. My heart hammered in my chest. I sat up, scanning the darkness, but nothing moved. Jenna, come here. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the campsite. The others were asleep. Did you hear that? I whispered, shaking Kelly awake. What? She mumbled groggily. A voice, I said, my own trembling. Someone's out there. She listened for a moment, then shook her head. It's just the wind. Go back to sleep. But I couldn't. I sat awake, listening to the whispers until dawn. The next day, we pushed deeper into the pass. The trees closed in, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The acrid smell grew overwhelming, and then we found it, a crude altar in a clearing. The stone slab was covered in animal bones and charred remains. In the center was a blackened mass, unrecognizable but undeniably wrong. What the hell is this? Kelly whispered, her face pale. Probably some kind of ritual site, Sam said, but his bravado faltered. We need to leave, I said, my voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, a rustling came from the trees. We froze. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long, its head a grotesque deer skull with twisted antlers. Its glowing red eyes locked onto us, and it took a jerky step forward. Run, I whispered, but my legs refused to move. The creature stepped closer, its breath rasping like wind through dead leaves. Run, I screamed, breaking the spell. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush. Kelly stumbled, but Sam yanked her up, and we didn't stop until we reached the campsite. The fire was out, the RV eerily untouched. But something was wrong. We're leaving, I said, fumbling for the keys. No, Sam said firmly. If we drive now, we'll get lost. Better lost than dead, I snapped. Before the argument could escalate, Kelly grabbed my arm. Wait, she whispered. Do you hear that? It was Kelly's voice, but it was coming from the trees. Help me, the voice called, perfect in tone but hollow in its desperation. That's not me, Kelly said, her face pale as death. The RV rocked violently, as if something massive was pushing it. A voice came again, my voice this time. Come out, Jenna, it's safe. Sam grabbed a knife, but he looked as terrified as Kelly, who was sobbing into her hands. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit and yanked the door open. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on me. Come closer, it whispered, mimicking my voice. My hands trembled as I aimed the flare gun and fired. The flare hit its chest, igniting it in a burst of light. The creature screamed, a sound that wasn't one voice but many, layered and inhuman. Then it vanished into the dark. We didn't wait to see if it would return. Sam floored the RV, and we didn't stop until we reached the ranger station. I uploaded my photos a week later, hoping for something salvageable. That's when I saw it, a picture I didn't remember taking. In the background, the creature stood behind me, its glowing eyes boring into the camera. I haven't been back to the wilderness since. I swear, budget travelers are the cheapest people around. My cousin An convinced me to road trip across the country in this beat-up RV he scored off Craigslist. His whole pitch? We'll save a fortune on hotels, dude. Yeah, maybe if you don't factor in the gas mileage for this behemoth. Right now, we're somewhere in Tennessee, I think. Honestly, after a while, all those back roads and state parks blur together. Don't get me wrong, it's beautiful out here. Anne's all about the hiking and nature stuff. Me? I'm cool as long as I've got cell service and a cold beer at the end of the day. Last night, we pulled into this roadside campground on the edge of some thick, tangled woods. Figured it'd be a quick overnight, hit the road by sunrise kind of deal. But when An went to check us in, the old lady at the campground station, she had to be at least 100, was nowhere to be found. Most folks would call it a night, leave a note, or whatever. But not An. Free camping, he said, his eyes practically glowing. Let's ditch the hookups and go wild camping. I wasn't sure about all that, but whatever. We found a secluded spot near the woods. I killed the engine and the forest went dead quiet. That kind of quiet that feels wrong, you know? An, oblivious, started unpacking his ridiculously oversized hiking backpack. Gonna snag us some trout for dinner, Ganeski declared. You wanna come? And miss out on setting up prime ghost-watching territory? No way, man. I laughed, already settling into a lawn chair with a cold one. An just shrugged, tossed me a "you're lost" look, and disappeared into the trees. That's when things started getting weird. It was barely dusk, but the forest was already as dark as pitch. All the usual night sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, the occasional owl were absent. The silence was oppressive. Then I heard it. Rustling behind the RV. At first I thought it was a squirrel or raccoon, but the noise was heavier, deliberate. I peeked through the RV window. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like 1,000 eyes were staring out from the shadows. The rustling got louder, circling the RV. I grabbed my pocket knife off the counter, not that it would do much against anything bigger than a possum. Suddenly, something slammed into the side of the RV. The whole thing rocked, and I yelped, dropping the knife. My heart was pounding. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl. Except it wasn't a growl. It was wet and ragged, like a cough dragged out of something not quite human. I pressed myself against the RV window, trying to see. Then I caught a glimpse, a silhouette against the trees. It was massive, hunched, and moving on way too many legs. My brain stuttered trying to process it. The shape was all wrong, like something twisted out of a nightmare. The RV rocked again. The thing was circling. Its heavy footsteps thudded closer. I curled up in the driver's seat, trying to disappear into the upholstery. The noises outside stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like the thing was listening, waiting. Hours passed. At least, I think they did. Time stretches when you're waiting to die. Just as I started to believe the thing had left, I heard scratching. It was coming from above on the roof. The sound was deliberate, clawed. Then came a wet thump. Something heavy had landed up there. My breath hitched as the scratching turned into scraping, slow, methodical, back and forth. I couldn't breathe. And then came sniffing, right above the air vent. I could almost feel its hot breath, smell its stench, rotten meat and something worse. Dude, you in there? Found some killer trout, man? You gotta see this. Anne's voice shattered the tension, muffled through the RV walls. Relief flooded through me, but only for a second. Dude? He called again, then fell silent. A moment later, a blood-curdling scream cut through the night. It ended abruptly, as if someone had yanked the sound out of existence. The scratching on the roof stopped. Silence, heavy, suffocating silence. My whole body locked up. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I strained to hear anything that would tell me An was okay. Then, from the woods, I heard rustling again. The thing was retreating, dragging something heavy. I didn't need to see to know what it had. I forced myself to move, fumbling for the keys. The engine coughed to life, and I floored it. I didn't stop until I reached a diner miles away, its neon lights flickering like a lifeline. Inside, I nursed watery coffee with shaking hands. I couldn't eat. My mind kept replaying the creature's shape, its glowing eyes, and scream. I should have told someone. The cops, the waitress, anyone. But how do you explain a monster from the woods? No one would believe me. And what if they found nothing? Worse, what if they found An, or what was left of him? I ditched the RV in a grocery store parking lot at dawn, took what little cash I had, a burner phone, and started walking. Maybe I'll keep moving, always looking over my shoulder. They call creatures like that skin riders. Urban legends, ghost stories meant to scare kids around campfires. Turns out, some stories have teeth. I wish An hadn't been so into nature. Hell, I wish I'd never agreed to this stupid trip. But it's too late now. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, those sounds will haunt me forever. I'm never going into the woods again. My name's Max Holloway, and back in 2017, I decided to take my old RV on a trip to Badlands National Park in South Dakota. I figured a few days of solitude might help me sort out my tangled thoughts, or at least give me a solid excuse to skip my ex's wedding. Just a guy and his questionable life choices hitting the open road. After a couple of long days behind the wheel, I finally reached the park. The rugged landscape of eroded buttes and jagged pinnacles stretched out before me like the bones of some ancient world. It was eerily beautiful, the kind of place that felt frozen in time, so still, so isolated, you could almost hear the echoes of a prehistoric past. I found a secluded spot far from the handful of other campers scattered throughout the park. The isolation felt like a blessing and a curse, a stark reminder of just how small I was in the grand scheme of things. As I set up camp, I cracked a joke to myself about finally finding a place quieter than my love life. My laugh echoed back at me, hollow in the vast emptiness. The first night was uneventful. I cooked up some canned beans and franks over a campfire, watched the stars light up the sky like scattered diamonds, and felt a rare sense of peace. But peace in a place like this has a way of turning on you. It was around midnight on the second night when I first heard it, faint rustling outside the RV. My mind immediately jumped to harmless explanations. A deer, maybe a raccoon nosing around. But something about the sound made my skin crawl. It wasn't frantic or random, like an animal. It was deliberate, slow. I peered out the window but saw nothing but shadows. The flashlight I brought with me sat on the counter, and after a moment of hesitation, I grabbed it and stepped outside. The cold air bit at my skin as I called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded too loud, unnatural against the quiet. Nothing answered except the whisper of the wind through the rock formations. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the landscape, catching only twisted shapes of stone and the stark outlines of distant boots. Shaking off my unease, I retreated to the RV, locking the door and convincing myself it was just my imagination. Then came the thud. It was sharp, jarring, and came from the back of the RV. My heart raced as I grabbed a tire iron from beneath the seat. A poor excuse for a weapon, but better than nothing. I edged toward the rear, every instinct screaming for me to stay put. Another thud followed, this one louder, accompanied by the faint scrape of something against metal. Summoning every ounce of courage, I flung open the rear door, shining the flashlight into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing, just the endless, yawning void of night. But then, just beyond the reach of the light, a figure emerged. It was a man, or something resembling one. Tall, gaunt, with clothes that hung from him like rags, stained dark with what I prayed wasn't blood. His face was hollowed, his eyes glinting with a malevolence that set every nerve in my body on edge. "Nice night for camping, isn't it?" he rasped, his voice carrying a note of mockery that made my stomach churn. "Look, man," I stammered, raising the tire iron slightly. "I don't want any trouble." He tilted his head, a slow, deliberate motion that felt more predatory than human. "Trouble? No trouble," he said, stepping closer. "Just thought I'd say hello. Not many folks out here. Lonely, isn't it?" "Yeah, and I'd like to keep it that way," I snapped, trying to mask my growing terror with sarcasm. "So, if you don't mind." "Sleep is the cousin of death," he interrupted, his grin widening to something that didn't belong on a human face. "Right? And curiosity killed the cat. What's your point?" His laugh was low and guttural, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "You've got spirit. I like that." Then he lunged. I swung the tire iron, the impact sending a jolt up my arm as it connected with his shoulder. He barely flinched. Before I could react, we were grappling, his strength far greater than his wiry frame suggested. His hands closed around my throat, squeezing with a force that made my vision blur. Desperation kicked in. My knee shot up, slamming into his groin. He let out a grunt, doubling over just long enough for me to grab the hunting knife strapped to his belt. The blade felt foreign in my hand, but instinct took over. When he lunged again, I thrust it forward, the sickening resistance as it sank into his side, almost making me vomit. He stumbled back, clutching the wound, his grin twisting into a snarl. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom before vanishing into the darkness. I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear, Every sound outside amplified 100-fold. I sat clutching the knife, unable to close my eyes. The memory of his gaze burned into my mind. By dawn, I was tearing down camp, my only thought to get as far away as possible. The sight of flashing police lights near the park's exit was a relief like I'd never known. When the officer asked if I'd seen anyone suspicious, I recounted the encounter. His expression darkened. "You just described Vincent Kane," he said. "Escaped convict. Dangerous. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky? Maybe. But as I drove away, the weight of what had happened and what could have settled over me. The Badlands had shown me something I didn't want to see. The line between man and monster is thinner than we think. Next time, I'd stick to beaches. Monsters are easier to spot in the sunlight. I was out in the Cherokee National Forest, my old RV nestled deep in the woods for my usual solo camping trip. Name's Evander, by the way. Yeah, you probably haven't met many Vanders. Hell, most folks think I'm nuts for going out there alone. But it's who I am. A history nerd, obsessed with the old mountain myths, the eerie tales about strange creatures lurking in the woods. You know, the ones they say are waiting for the lost, the careless, the foolish. Irony isn't lost on me, considering what happened. It was last June when I parked my RV by this peaceful creek in a quiet clearing, a spot no one would think to find me for miles. The first few days were typical, hiking, fishing, and taking way too many pictures of trees for Instagram. But there's one thing I didn't post, a discovery that chilled me to my core. By the creek, half buried in the mud, was a deer skull. But the antlers? They were wrong. Twisted, warped, and fused together, way too many of them. No way that was natural. I'm not superstitious, but that thing set my nerves on edge. That night, something changed. It was around 2 in the morning when I heard it, a scraping sound outside my RV. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or some other nocturnal critter. But then came the clicking, sharp and rhythmic, like bones snapping in quick succession, and then the wet, slurping sound, as if something was feeding. My blood ran cold. My hands gripped the edge of the bed, trembling. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. I stayed frozen, my breath shallow, listening as the sounds grew closer. The scraping moved along the side of the RV, and then silence. The kind of silence that eats at you, like the whole world is holding its breath. In the morning, I stepped outside, every muscle tense, expecting to find claw marks or bloodstains. But there was nothing, not a single trace. I should have left then and there, but my stubborn pride kept me rooted. The next night, the noises returned. But this time, they came with a shadow. A figure passed by my window, a twisted mockery of a deer standing upright. Its legs were too long, bending backward in an unnatural gait. And those antlers, they writhed like living things, a grotesque crown of writhing bone. I didn't sleep, couldn't. When daylight came, I packed up in a blind panic, my hands fumbling with every latch and lever. By the time I hit the interstate, I still couldn't shake the feeling of those glowing eyes watching me. For weeks, I was a wreck, jumping at every sound, every shadow. Then I read the news. A couple had vanished from the same part of the forest. People blamed a bear, but I knew better. The Cherokee legends spoke of something ancient, a shapeshifter, a guardian of sacred places. I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't escape the thought that it might still be hunting me. So I went back. I prepared offerings, wooden carvings, herbs, trinkets said to appease the spirits. And I brought my pistol, even though I wasn't sure it would make a difference. The drive back felt like stepping into my own grave. The trees seemed darker, the shadows longer, like the forest itself had come alive. The first 2 nights were quiet, but on the third, the cameras caught it. The grainy footage showed that same twisted creature, its antlers writhing, its glowing eyes scanning the clearing. It sniffed the offerings, but didn't touch them. Instead, it turned, toward the camera, toward me. I stepped into the clearing, my pistol heavy in my hand. My voice cracked as I spoke. "Leave me alone. Leave everyone alone." The creature emerged, its clicking filling the air, louder now, almost mocking. It didn't hesitate. It charged faster than anything I'd ever seen. I fired, the gunshots shattering the night. It screamed, a sound that burrowed into my soul. I ran. My foot caught on a root and I tumbled, twisting my ankle. Pain lanced up my leg, but I scrambled forward, desperate. When I finally reached the RV and slammed the door shut, the forest fell silent once more. I drove until the gas light came on, stopping only when the sun was high in the sky. I haven't gone back since. I don't think I ever will. That thing in the forest, it tasted my fear. And if it finds me again, I know it won't stop until it's had its fill.